Hello and welcome to another episode of NF2 and You. We are so excited today. We're joined by Will Davidson. We're talking more about hearing rehabilitation today. Will has very kindly come to chat to us about having an AVI. So, Will, thank you for joining us today. How are you?
Thank you for having me.
Is everything well? How's everything going with lockdown?
Yeah, things pretty well. I mean, obviously, I think lockdown's been difficult for everyone. But obviously, hopefully, we're slowly getting to the end of it now and getting back to some sense of normality the next few months.
Yeah, definitely. So today we're talking obviously about your experience of having an AVI. So I've got so many questions with it. So I think the first one, which is really important, I think, for the people watching, is can you tell us sort of what is an AVI? How does it work?
Yeah, sure. So, an ABI, well, stands for an Auditory Brainstem Implant, and it's a hearing device. And it comes kind of in two parts. You have the external part and an internal part. An external part is very similar to a cochlear implant. In fact, I think they use the same external processor as cochlear implants. So it's I'll take it off, it's attached to my microphone. But it's goes so it's a processor through a magnet, then has a coil. So I take it off actually. So that's the external part. You have the processor and then magnets at the top. That part's similar to a cochlear implant. Where it
I was
differs
going
is
to
the
say
part
that looks almost the
inside.
same, doesn't it?
So the part that's implanted starts at the top of the skin, and then there's a wire that goes directly to the brain. And there's 21 electrodes that are kind of on the surface of the brainstem. And so basically the way it works, the sound processor, the external part, has microphones and that picks up the ambient sound. And then obviously that gets turned into a digital signal and is sent directly to the brain. And then the electrodes relay that to the brain itself. And it stimulates kind of the brain's part of the brain that normally deals with hearing. And then the brain has to kind of reinterpret that as sound.
I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Because it almost looks exactly like a cochlear implant from the outside side of things. I mean, what was the situation that meant you had an AVI rather than a cochlear implant?
It's a good question. So my understanding is obviously that you have kind of your ear and then the eardrum, and then you have the cochlea, and then you have the nerve that then connects to your brain. But because of the AN surgery, the acoustic neuroma surgery, that was growing, because that was growing on the nerve to actually remove the tumor, they had to remove the nerve. And that meant that there was no nerve between the cochlea and the brain, which meant that the cochlea itself wasn't working. So even putting a cochlear implant stimulates the cochlea, and then that's sent down your nerve. If you've had that nerve removed, then a cochlear implant won't work. So obviously, the ABI
Yeah.
bypass the cochlea and goes straight to the brain itself. And therefore, you get a cochlear implant. Generally, is better than ABI, but ABI is for people that can't have a cochlear implant.
Oh, okay. So, I know what's the process of getting an OVI. I mean, I know with the cochlear implant, you have to have all these different tests about understanding what the hearing function is. So if the nerve's removed, do they do any tests on the run up to the AVI?
So yes, I think for me it was probably slightly different. So when I was diagnosed with NF2, I was told I had to have surgery very quickly to remove the AN. I think I went from diagnosis to my first AN surgery was about 4 weeks. So I don't think my process may be normal, but I was pretty much told to go to Manchester. I was diagnosed at my local hospital down south. I was told to go to Manchester at that time, and as part of that appointment, they had brought in very lovely, who actually I still see even now, head of like the implant program, the audiologist. She kind of talked through what the ABI was, kind of what the risks were involved, and that was kind of my decision point. I kind of had one meeting, and it was decided that I would have it, and that was kind of the only preliminary conversation I had about an ABI before they implanted it. I think really the tests come in after you've had the ABI. So after about a month of surgery, you then have it turned on, which I think is quite similar to the way that cochlear implant works as well. So the first time you have it turned on, you have to actually go back into hospital, and they put you on like a heart monitor, and they start turning on all 21 electrodes. They do it one by one, and some of them, so for example for me, some of them actually maybe have like nervous twitches in my face. So if they turned on, so sound would trigger my face, would trigger weird movements in my eye. So they had to turn those ones off that were causing, they weren't problems. This wasn't hurt, it didn't hurt, but just those ones that were obviously having an impact on physical function as well. And then once they've decided that, you come back again and they start tuning it. So I think it was like every 3 or 4 weeks for about 6 months. You keep going back to have it retuned. They're testing the volume levels when it first turns on. It's quite set quite low, and then progressively it gets louder and louder and louder the more times you visit. And because your brain's getting used to the sound, so it becomes more aware of what's going on, and they slowly progress through how loud things are, and that takes a long process. I mean, even now I go back every year to kind of have them fiddle with it to retune it again, and so it changes. But I think the kind of first 6 months where you're kind of really having it retuned, and it's quite exhausting in terms of the amount of time you have to put into it, and the amount of changes. And I found that every time that you changed it, you kind of had to relearn a bit again. Things that you've kind of got used to were no longer sound the same way as you had imagined them. So it was really kind of 6 months of retuning, trying to get back to grips with it. So it's quite a lengthy process, I think. From having implanted to just being able to wear it normally is for about 6 months.
Yeah. Wow, I mean, that's a fair amount of time, isn't it? And actually, that's quite similar to what they say about the cochlear implant experience, having that switch on, having that rehabilitation process from there. I want to touch on quickly what you're talking about in terms of the surgery itself. So, did you have the surgery at the same time as having your acoustic neuroma removed, or were they two different surgeries?
Yeah, so they did it at the same time. So as when I had the AN surgery, they said that was, that they would do it at the same time to decrease the risk of the AN surgery. They said basically the ABI surgery is pretty much the same as an acoustic neuroma surgery anyway. So if you do it separately, you basically have to have that operation twice. So you might as well have it implanted at the same time, and it decreases the risk of infection, etc. Obviously, it takes slightly longer. I think it adds a couple of hours to the operation itself.
Yeah.
So I think my surgery ended up being about 14 hours. I think that was more due to the size of the tumour than the ABI itself. So my tumour was very large when they took it out. So I think the ABI was just an hour or two extra on top of that of what it should have been.
I mean, when you think about the surgery itself, I mean, it's ideal having it done at the same time, isn't it? I mean, do they even recommend it as a standalone surgery?
Yeah, so I think it's pretty much the norm that they try and do it at the same time. And for me, they did it when I still had hearing in my right ear, so it was done in my left ear. And I could still hear normally in my right ear, so it was done kind of as backup as well. So if it failed, they could potentially do it again when they had to do the second surgery. So realistically, I had that done in 2007. And then I didn't actually start using it until 2009 because I could still hear in my right ear, so it wasn't of much use. So it was put in as what they call a sleeper.
Of course.
So it's kind of there, waiting to be activated. And obviously they turned it on to check it worked, and then they actually did the tuning, and that was very much well, you don't have to, but we will retune it and when you have your next operation as well. So I didn't really start wearing it until about 2009, so probably 2 years it kind of sat in a drawer.
So in 2009, had you lost your hearing on the other side, or what was the situation?
Yeah, so I had the surgery in 2007. So I was diagnosed in February 2007, actually about a month before I was supposed to be going traveling around South America on my gap year. And the doctors were very much not going. We're not letting you out of the country. And so I had the surgery very quickly. I think it was about 4 weeks in a way. It was probably quite a good thing in hindsight. I didn't really have time to absorb the diagnosis of NF2 at all. It was just, you've got this condition, we're operating in 4 weeks. And that was kind of the end of the situation. So in a way, it was useful. And then I lost my hearing, and I was told at that point I was going to go deaf in my right ear as well. But I kind of naively assumed it would be a few years. They kind of said it would probably be 3 or 4 years, and really, within about a year, I had lost the majority of the hearing anyway. But because the tumor wasn't growing, they decided it was best to just leave it, even though I'd pretty much gone deaf a year later. And I guess, well, probably maybe with most people's experience, I was kind of a bit resistant to accept I was going deaf as well, so I didn't like wearing it. Until really the reality of having surgery again in 2009, I kind of had to accept, I already was deaf at this point. They'd removed both ANs and removed both hearing loss. So at that point, I started to really start wearing the ABI.
I think it's such a big adjustment sometimes, isn't it? Because I think particularly with hearing rehabilitation, people don't necessarily appreciate just the whole experience of losing your hearing and then the adjustment that takes. And then accommodating it with technology. And, that's a really huge process, not just physically, but psychologically as well. So I think most NF2s watching this can really appreciate that sort of hesitation on that side of things, And I mean, it seems like, you've had it for a really long time now. What sort of sounds does it give you? Like, is there anything that's more functioning sound than others?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I've had it for, 2017 now, it's 14 years. I'm not quite sure where the time has gone. It's been a long time. So I think the first thing when I got it is that they were very clear with me to lower my expectations before they implanted it. So I think it's important that from the outset, it was very much, this is not going to allow you to hear. It might help you to hear kind of background noises and to hear sound in general, but you're not going to likely be able to distinguish a lot of that. So they were very clear from the outset. So I think, at the time I was 18, I think, when I had it put in. So obviously, I hoped to be the exception to the rule. And hoped I would be the one that would be able to hear. Because there are a few people that can, but I think it's very, very, very few people. And so the initial turning on, it is just beeping. And I think that's probably quite similar to cochlear implants as well. It just sounds like random beeping. So you can't really distinguish anything to start with. And it's quite infuriating at the start when everything just kind of merges into one noise. And I think as time has progressed, there are things, it does get slightly easier and does become slightly more useful. So I can hear like things going off the background. For example, if someone rings the doorbell, I can hear the doorbell ringing, and I can tell you that it's the doorbell. I can hear, for example, if the alarm on the cooker is going off. I can hear, the telephone rings. I can tell if the dog's barking.
Yeah.
So I can distinguish those sounds, and I can hear if something's going on in the background. So I can hear there's a noise going on somewhere. And at the start, it took a long time to understand what those sounds might be. So I spent a lot of time being able to hear something like that, and then have to spend half an hour trying to find out what it is making the noise. Because I couldn't actually tell what it was. I just could tell there was a noise somewhere going off. And so I think the main thing is that it really does help with lip reading. So I find lip reading with it a lot easier. I'm not quite sure why, but I think it's just I can judge kind of the tone a little bit and judge kind of the rhythm of someone speaking. So it makes lip reading easier. But if they were talking behind me, I would know someone's talking, but I wouldn't know what they were saying. So it's useful.
I think sometimes, yeah, well, so I was going to say sometimes just knowing that there's a sound happening can be really useful because you sort of change your attention or, focused on sort of like, where's that sound? What is that sound? And I think, it sounds like from your experience that right at the start that it was quite overwhelming, with having this just singular sound, like everything becomes this one sound, and it sounds like over time that's improved as your brain has sort of learned as you go. Do you think you've got the most you can get for it now? Or will that be something that improves more?
I think it's interesting. So I've had three different external parts of the ABI because obviously technology does improve, and I don't think they have actually made any difference apart from things like battery life. So, for example, the first time I got the first processor, I think the battery lasted like 2 hours. So I had about 8 batteries I kind of had to change throughout the day, and now it lasts all day. So, technology's changed that aspect, but in terms of improving hearing, I think I would say realistically took about 4 or 5 years. And I would say after the 4 or 5 year point, it hasn't improved beyond that. So I would say it took about 4 or 5 years to get to the point where I'm with it now. In the last kind of 5 years, there's been no improvement in terms of how I can see things. Obviously, I think my lip reading has improved. So obviously that helps anyway. So obviously it's more helpful with lip reading, just the fact that my lip reading is better.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I think, as I say, it does help with just judging the sound. One thing that's very difficult is to judge the directional sound, which goes back to my point where sometimes there's something going off in the flat. I could spend quite a long time trying to find where it is because you can't quite judge the direction of the sounds coming from.
Right. What I was going to say about that, because I know when I had my cochlear implants, I empathise with the battery life as well. It's why I stopped using it actually, is like having to change the batteries all the time. But directional sound was another thing, and it's almost like you hear something and then you go on a treasure hunt trying to find what that something is. And I think one of the funniest experiences for me when I had my cochlear implant was, there was an occasion I was sat on the sofa and I heard this almighty bang, right? And I was living with a few other girls at the time. So I went running upstairs and I'm like, Sophie, what's this huge bang? Have you dropped something? It was like a bookshelf had dropped or something. And she was like, no, it's all cool. Everything's fine. I was like, what was that sound? And then I went back downstairs again and started watching TV again and realised I'd forgotten that I'd put something in the microwave. So actually, the ping on the microwave sounded like the massive bit of furniture falling down. It was mad. But it was like, because I didn't know where that sound was coming from, so I went navigating around the house trying to find where the sound was. I think actually, Will, one of the things that I'm really curious about, because obviously as NF2 is, we have to have regular MRIs. So how does that work when you've got the implant fissures?
Yeah, so that's slight uncomfortable part of having an ABI. So you can still have MRI scans, but what they do is they have to bandage your head quite tightly before you get an MRI machine. That's because obviously there's a magnet implanted in just behind the skin of the head, and obviously an MRI machine is a giant magnet. So obviously it's not great to be going into an MRI machine with a magnet anywhere. You have to take all metallic things off before you go in. So it's not a good thing generally to have a metal on your head as you go in.
Yeah.
So the way they do it is they wrap your head very tightly with basically a bandage. They put a bit of like putty, rubber putty, in between the bandage and it, and they also inject, which is probably the most uncomfortable part, local anaesthetic into the head as well, so you don't kind of feel the magnet moving when you're in the machine. And also what they do is they reduce your time in the MRI machine as well. So generally scans about half an hour. So you don't get any of these kind of 2-hour scans anymore. So they're kind of 30 minutes, 40 minutes max. And it's not the most comfortable thing in the world. I would say it's not painful. It's not painful, it's just uncomfortable. So it's always kind of a relief when you get out of them. But I would say that it's very much doable and it's uncomfortable, but it's not painful.
Right. Does it feel like sort of pressure in the head? Is that what it feels like?
So you can feel the pressure. Yeah, so I think everyone has kind of different experience for stuff. I feel like it can feel the magnet, kind of the pressure where the bandage is, and the pressure where the magnet's kind of been
Yeah.
forced down. I think for me anyway, I don't like things being on my
Right.
head anyway, so it's probably slightly worse just the fact that I would choose not to have a bandage around my head. And I think it's as I say, it's okay. It was just uncomfortable. So when you're in the machine, you can kind of, it's not a particularly comfortable experience, but it's not a painful experience. And it allows you to have the MRI scan. So I think it's quite a positive thing that they were able to do it. When I first had it done, well, 14 years ago, I had to have CT scans, and they wouldn't put me in an MRI machine at all. And I think they probably missed quite a few tumours at that point. So I think it's probably better that we've got to this point where, yes, you have to go through a little bit of being uncomfortable for a little time, but actually it does allow you to have proper MRI scans rather than hoping that they will spot things with CT scan. And CT scans are much less, the tumour has to be much bigger on a CT scan before they can sit. So it's definitely positive.
And I think this is
Awful.
one of my initial thoughts, because it's almost like where your priorities are. It's almost like, well, do you decide that MRI is more important, or do you decide that hearing is more important? And that's such a difficult thing. But you're right, I think as technology has progressed, I mean, personally, I still look at that process and think, surely in this scientific age, we'd have a better solution than wrapping our heads and having local anesthetic. But still, small steps, and at least, you know, the process allows the management to still go ahead, you know. That's it. That's all my questions burnt out today now, Will. Honestly, I think you've given us so much information for people to try and understand the process, what it's like, and your experience of it a little bit more. So thank you so much for coming and talking with us today.
No worries at all. Thank you for having me. And obviously, I'm happy to answer any questions that people have when they see this. Have to be contacted by Can You Hear Us?
Brilliant. All right, guys. So there you go. If you have any questions at all, send a message to us. We'll get those relayed to Will. Also, don't forget to check out the other videos on our channel and click this subscribe button. It means we can start to reach for more people as well. Thank you again very much. Take care and see you soon.
Thank you.